So I think we now have our quorum,
Ew.
and I would like to call to order this November regular board meeting of the Urbana Park District Board of Commissioners.
2 months. We'll be in January.
And though we have two commissioners not here, we don't have any requests for remote attendance. So first item is to accept our agenda or else modify it for the evening, and
I move that we accept the agenda as presented.
Second? Oh, I guess it's you and me tonight, isn't it?
yeah, you can play tag team. That's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And that carries unanimously. Next up is public comment. I don't see any public here to make comments, but there is a staff introduction listed.
Jake's got conflicts for the next 2 months, so we'll see him in January. We'll introduce him at the January board meeting, but I did talk with Joseph, and of course I've been talking with Jake, and can tell you that they feel like their team's really doing great work right now, and they're catching up on a lot of deferred maintenance and deferred cleaning, so he's been a great addition to the staff, and we're excited to introduce him to you in January.
Is he somebody who moved up from?
No, he
Oh,
came.
somebody in from the outside.
Correct.
Good.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All righty. Takes us to the UPDEC report. And we have, I believe, some minutes that were in our board packet.
Great.
I would mention that there's one unfortunate typo in those.
Oh, where is that?
On page 3, Corky announced that UPD Aquatics is not an official USA swim program, and I think, yes, right.
No.
At least there's not an exclamation mark with that. I was dodging wildfires and earthquakes, so I wasn't there, so I have no comments to make.
Okay.
Successfully, I will say, dodging.
Well, if there are no questions or comments on that, then we can move on to our consent agenda. On the consent agenda for this evening, the approval of the minutes from the October 8th, 2019 regular board meeting, the receipt of our monthly reports from the three departments that we normally receive them from, approval of the monthly paid accounts payable, and lastly, action to accept the philanthropy report and gifts listed with gratitude. So it's the purview of any single commissioner to remove any or all of these items from the consent agenda for separate action. Is there any such request?
I move that we approve all the action items on the consent agenda and accept all the information items listed on the consent agenda in an omnibus manner.
Second.
That's been moved and seconded, and under the rules of our consent agenda, there is to be no discussion at this point. So let's take a roll call vote, and we'll start at the left here with LaShonda.
Aye.
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 And that carries unanimously with the three commissioners present voting. And that takes us on to our financial reports.
Okay, great. Well, thank goodness. I finally, I'm back in the habit of writing a script, so I'll try not to be quite so impromptu, because I think it works a lot better for me to have prepared a little better ahead of time. So I'm going to discuss three financial reports with you. The first one is called the Revenue and Expenditure Report. This report shows the receipts and expenditures for the prior 12-month period, the budget for the current period, and the preliminary unaudited results for the 6 months ending October 31st, 2019.
6 months already.
We're halfway through the year. Sum 1 is all funds except for the capital improvements fund. So this is all of our operating funds. Revenues for this period were $8,028,000. Yeah, which is an increase of $1,812,000 over the prior month. 1.6 million of that was a property tax disbursement we received in October. So the other 200,000 was a combination of all of these other revenue sources. We have received 90% of our property tax disbursements for levy year 2018. Expenditures were $4,815,000, which is a change of $802,000 since September. We have a surplus after 6 months, which means there's an excess of revenues over expenditures paid of $3,213,000. Sum 2 is on the next page. This isolates just the capital improvements fund. Revenues for this 6-month period were $514,000 and expenditures were $360,000. Revenues exceed expenditures at this time, which leaves an increase in fund balance in the capital improvements fund of $154,000, which is pretty rare for this point in the year of that fund. But we've received, especially because we've received the upfront $200,000 for the OSLAD grant. They pre-funded the first half of the grant. So that's the way that they're structuring that grant now. So we have that listed as revenue in here, which, we haven't really started spending on that very much yet, so.
That's not, it didn't used to be like that, right? Didn't we just have to struggle?
It was a reimbursement.
Yeah,
grant.
that's what I thought, yeah. Well, that makes a
Well,
huge
they
difference.
realize, that can be a real hindrance to some
Right.
entities that maybe don't have that cash flow,
Yeah,
so they try
yeah.
to adjust it. But we don't get the second half till the project's complete. so.
That's fine with me. This just
Yeah.
seems to me to be a wiser way to do it. So, I mean, we can say one thing positive
Yes.
out of Springfield, that
Love
they're making things easier for us.
Absolutely.
Katie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the way they have it, where they put the money up front,
Mhm.
half of it, you then have 2 years to complete the project. Where if
Oh,
you-
wow.
the old way, you had 3 years, but you got the money at the very end.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah.
I think so, yeah. I think Kara was talking about that.
Yeah, I think you may still have the option to do the longer timetable and get the money at the end, but for us, it was better to get up
Yep,
front
yep,
and get
yeah.
going.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But we don't plan to take 2 years either,
No.
right?
No, we certainly don't.
5.
And finally, just on page 3, I like to point out that after 6 months of the fiscal year, our ending fund balance in all of our funds is $10,630,000. Following that are the summary reports for the individual funds, which would be our main working funds, the general fund, the recreation fund, the museum fund, and the indoor pool. Does anybody have any questions about the revenue and expenditure report for October? Great. The next report that I'll talk about is the treasurer's report. But before I dive into it, I prepared,
Oh, and
A
she's not
picture?
here. Oh, rats.
I just threw this together because I think it's relevant to what we're seeing in the treasurer's report tonight. So it intrigued me, and I said, I'm going to graph this out really quickly to give you guys an idea.
You gotta copy this and send it off to Meredith.
I will. I did last
Oh,
time
did you?
too.
Yeah, she'll
Yeah.
appreciate this.
I will. Okay, so the treasurer's report is a report of the amount of cash that the district has on one day, October 31st, 2019. All 24 funds are listed with where the cash is invested for a grand total for October of $12,560,486.62. This is where I got to that and I said, that's, when you get to 12 million, I said, I don't think that we've ever had a cash balance of $12,560,000 that I've been here. And I said, I'd really like to graph that. So I graphed the last 3 fiscal years
Yeah.
worth of balances at the end of each month, basically. So I opened up each treasurer's report and just made a point on the graph
Sure.
for each of those points. And there was 2 striking things. One is the total cash balance for the month, which is great. But the other thing that really stood out to me is the way the green line is
Yeah,
shaped compared
yeah.
to the other 2.
Yeah,
And
no,
that's entirely because of the timing of the property tax disbursements this year.
Yeah.
So you could see in May, we didn't have the property
Oh,
tax
yeah.
disbursement. We didn't get it until June. So it's lagging about a month behind. And
Mm-hmm,
so you can see finally in October, it catches up to where it should have really been in September.
Yeah,
Because I looked in the property taxes that we received in September, we received on September 27th and September 26th, the 2 prior years, and we got it October 10th this year. So it's about a month, it's showing up a month behind, even though it's maybe only a week or 2
Right.
behind the previous schedule, but it's overlapping into another month. So it's just kind of interesting, but, we're right on track, and I've always said, our entire fiscal year is front-loaded because all the property taxes are received before, September, October, and then we spend it all down the rest of the year. You can see that really clearly with this, so I thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Okay, moving on to page 2. The top section lists amounts that we have in interest-bearing accounts. Of that $12,560,000 that we have on hand, $11,215,000 is out in investments at some rate of interest. I wanted to touch briefly on another topic as well. I'll be spending the next month or so evaluating the best options for where we should be investing the bond proceeds until we're ready to spend them. I don't know if you remember when we got the bond proceeds from the last big bonds, Dottie opened an account with Midland State Bank where she was able to get a 1% interest rate at a time when no other banks were offering anything like that. I actually called and talked to her about it and kind of what strategy she used for calling the local banks. And so she said her primary objective was to have an account where the money was kept completely separate from all of our other accounts, so that she could really track just that money and how each dollar was spent. So she said, you know, the interest itself isn't really that important because we didn't issue this money to make interest. We issued this money to spend it. And that makes a lot of sense. Since then, I've also, rather than opening a new account, I mean, we may need to open a new account, but rather than initiating a new relationship, I thought it'd be valid also to call all of our current banking relationships and ask them what kind of strategies they have. And I already have one phone call set up with the IPDLAF Plus, the Liquid Assets Fund, the Park District, that we have $1 million of CDs with, as well as a small investment account. It's on this list. We call it Park Pool. So we already have a relationship with them. I have a phone call set up with them for Friday, but basically they have a dedicated bond proceeds management program where they actually do the monitoring for the arbitrage rebate for you, and they help with compliance with IRS paperwork. So that all sounded really great to me, since it's not my area of expertise. So I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with them and then maybe comparing that to what some of the other banking relationships might be able to offer. So either way, I just wanted to prepare the board that likely at the regular December board meeting, I'll be bringing some kind of paperwork to either open a specific account with Park Pool or some other bank that I discover along the way over the next month. So I just wanted to let you know that's in the works, and the bond proceeds are set to be received on December 23rd. So I have, you know, a little over a month to figure that out, but if I need board approval to open an account, I need to bring it to that December 10th meeting.
Right.
So that's my intention.
Sounds like a good idea.
Okay. The next section lists interfund loans. On this page 2, there were no changes to interfund loans for this period. And the final section on page 3 lists disbursements of funds. The vendor payments match the total paid accounts payable that you saw on the consent agenda. You can see the larger payment out of the liability fund, about $170,000 of that amount was for our annual liability insurance policy renewal. So that's a standard process that takes place every October. And another payment that was kind of larger than usual was out of the Perkins Road Fund, where progress is continuing at that site. So we had a $150,000 payment towards that project as well. Total disbursements of funds for October were up to $787,000.
I move we accept the treasurer's report for audit.
Second.
That's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And that carries unanimously.
And lastly, I'll just touch briefly on the areas in the capital budgets that had activity. They're highlighted with an asterisk symbol. So in the 2019 capital budget, donations were received for tributes, and a transfer was recognized for a portion of the interpretive exhibit design for the Nature Center. Expenses were paid towards tributes. A laptop was purchased out of technology funds. Payments were made towards lighting repairs at the Meadowbrook Park House. And the final payment for design was paid for the Nature Center's interpretive exhibit design. And also, further down, when we get to the Leo Park improvements line, we made a payment towards parking lot and park improvements design to BCA. And lastly, trees and shrubs were purchased from the American Water Grant that was for Crystal Lake.
Oh, right.
In the 2018 capital budget, expenses were paid towards tributes, James Room construction wrap-up, water testing at Crystal Lake, and on engineering for the one-way road system in Crystal Lake Park. And the 2017 capital budget had 2 items of activity. Expenditures occurred on construction crew projects, and ITEP construction engineering was paid out of the trails projects line. There was no activity in the 2016 capital budget this month. And now Andy and Derek may have some updates for you on capital projects.
Yep, planning on starting with Crystal Lake Park. Since our last board meeting, we held our public open house for the CLP rehab project and the saline habitat enhancement. It's really just to provide information to anybody that was interested. We had IDNR representative there, as well as our engineering representative for the lake rehab project, as well as our staff team. We did not have great attendance, I would say, but we didn't receive any negative comments or concerns from the public at it. I think the people that did show up were appreciative that we had the public meeting just to be able to provide any input and show what's about to happen in the park. So.
Was it mostly people from that general neighborhood, or did you have a sense of
I
that?
don't think so.
Oh, really? Good.
We had two Franklin Street residents that showed up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it seemed like that. Other than that, it was sort of a smattering.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
With the rehab project, we had our 90% design review meeting last week. We'll have what I'll call a part 2 of the meeting next week that's going to focus primarily on the OSLAD portions of the project and continuing on with anything in the lake edge that we still need to catch up on from last meeting. And we anticipate the board to have a recommendation for award in late winter. It's looking like January or February at this point, with a late winter, early construction period, probably moving into the summer. With the saline habitat enhancement, the contractor will be on site this week. He's going to start mobilization and site preparation. They'll work for the next month at the site and then return again in the spring to continue with the landscaping portion of the project. Moving to Leal Park, the path and parking expansion. We've had a couple delays in the past few weeks. One of them, we were notified our engineering team did not have all the recommended plan revisions incorporated from the city review, so that has taken some time to settle out. And during the course of site excavation, we had a contractor came up with a few grave markers, which has now triggered us to speak with the state archaeologist and begin a process where I'll meet with a local archaeological representative that will then work with the state archaeologist through the historic preservation and IDNR, and then do a study on the site and see if there's any potential burials there that may necessitate us to revise our project.
Oh, wow.
So obviously it's getting quite cold out, so
That's what, yeah, I was gonna ask, how much of a delay
the
could that
site
be?
will have to be secured for the winter, and then hopefully we'll be able to come back in the spring and finish it.
You have a sense of the age of were they stones?
Yeah.
18.
One was 1836.
Oh, wow.
We've had numbers of them from previous, when
Right.
we did work there in the past, so hopefully this is just a process. We'll go through and figure it out, and
Because we've essentially been cleared, if you will, before, right?
we have been
Or do
able
you
to
have to do
continue
ca-
our work. You
Yeah.
know, I think things, we're certainly, whatever we need to do to progress, we'll do, but,
Yeah.
you know, if we needed to, you know, reinter anything, we can do that. If we need site markers or history markers, those are things we could easily do at the
Sure.
site.
Yeah.
Historical records we have suggest that at the time that the cemetery was decommissioned, essentially, any remains and tombstones they could find that had kind of living members of the family were worked with to relocate.
Sure.
And ones where they couldn't, our records suggest that they laid them over and let it be. We also have some records from when the cottage was located there that they came across some remains. We recall that through talking with Robin that the local coroner came out and issued a death certificate. There's also some records from PACA that some of the remains were relocated from there. And BCA has some memory that when the parking lot went in, the initial one, some remains were found, and those were also relocated, although they have no record, no written record of that. So obviously, times are different today than they were then, so we're going to work very closely with the state archaeologist just to see what they recommend and move forward.
Two things I'm curious about is if anything was discovered at the Culver site, which is right adjacent to us, obviously a private development. There's a lot of digging there and looks like a lot deeper than what we did. Also, IDOT's plans for the University Avenue improvements, certainly
Right.
moving into the park site and excavating all that. We'll see what kind of process, if any, they're required to do.
Could they LiDAR that to see what was there to sort of finally clear it out, or
I
is
don't know.
that too
That's
much?
a good question. We'll find out, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because that would take, then you wouldn't have to,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it'd be a lot easier,
Yeah.
I would think to, I mean, I don't know who has a spare LiDAR in their back pocket, but still, that might be
The
a,
university might.
Yeah,
they might.
right.
I sold mine, otherwise I'd.
On a more positive note,
Well, that won't be hard.
we had our presentation at IDNR headquarters in Springfield for the Blair Oslad grant. Kara did a really good job leading the presentation. We had to sit there for a while and watch a lot of other presentations before us, and I noticed, and was probably biased, but the panel seemed much more engaged, up in their seat, very interested in our district's presentation being framed more as a way to reach teens, and then discussing the Yelp Play feature, which was that electronic board that you can hit tennis balls or soccer against. Or we also found out throw snowballs against in the winter.
Wow.
It went very well. We don't
Multi-purpose.
have any official news at this point, but feeling good.
One other addition on the Crystal Lake project. Tomorrow we'll be meeting with Jake Wolf from ERA and the Sanitary District to discuss the sanitary bridge. The current plan is to include some work around the sanitary bridge as part of our lake project, and then based upon the work we do between now and the end of the fiscal year, budget for hopefully some improvements next fiscal year. Sounds like at a minimum they're thinking about redoing the decking, but there may be an opportunity to redo some of the railing as well.
Oh, I cross that bridge often enough, and it's, excuse me, a little aromatic at
You're
times.
right.
It is, absolutely. It's,
You don't even have to cross it.
Right.
Notice it's,
the birding community calls it Stink Bridge.
Right.
yeah.
Same
Probably they're not alone.
Aromatic.
That's it for me, unless there's some questions.
Well, seeing none, thank you. That'll move us along then to the executive director's report, I believe.
Sure. Well, as you would expect, staff's been very busy working on our health and wellness component of our strategic
yeah.
plan. Just setting the stage. Obviously, we're working on, working with Farnsworth Group and our local stakeholders. Probably what we're keeping our eye on most is the grant schedule. We have some dates to go over here in a little bit, but I'll give a little bit of background. To be able to meet that January 17th submission date. So kind of working backwards, we're doing many things. We've just finished up our discussions with our key stakeholders, and we had meetings today, morning and afternoon. Something that we're real keen on, 2 sites that we want to get more information, one at Lincoln Square, obviously something central, could be appealing to all. We met with Jim Webster, the owner, and we also met with the city to talk about the parking arrangement. As you know, there's an overlapping interest. Lincoln Square building is owned by one, and the parking lots are controlled and owned by the city, and there's an agreement that goes till 2035 to secure that. I think what we found out is, while there's a lot of interest in likely energy that could go into Lincoln Square, we probably couldn't put something together as quickly as we need to be able to define a site. One of the things we found out too in the grant is that it's preferred that you own a site. So if you have a long-term lease, it may be viewed differently than outright owning a site. But the reality was, it'd be very difficult time-wise by the time of the application to get all of the ownership, through. If we were trying to buy or receive, it'd have to be replatted, so we'd have to go through all the process with the city. So it's virtually impossible to meet that deadline. And so what we really thought about that would be, let's see how far we go with the grant. If we weren't successful, maybe there's another opportunity to come back and do something different. It's really clear that, Jim is very interested in some sort of association with the Park District. We've been at Lincoln Square in the past. It was very positive. We had Field of Greens for 7 years at that site.
Yeah, that's right.
And the energy and getting people and traffic coming there would seem to be real positive to him. And so, we'll continue to look at that. Again, I think the situation there with the parking in the building it'd just be challenging. The city would also have to be comfortable, giving up immediately if we were to be there. We just guesstimated, but 200 spaces would be a reasonable number. So you'd have to have those guaranteed daily. Obviously, if you had an operation there and it was, challenged by that would be hard. Some other things, that we're thinking about too there, expandability. There, are some maybe limitations on how far you could expand out in the future. So again, due to timing, and again, it wasn't an unwillingness to work. In fact, there were discussions about how fast could we work and what would we have to do to get into place. So again, we're just suggesting we hold that notion until we see how things turn out with our first choices. Likewise, we followed up, had a very good discussion with the county, with Darlene Kleppel. The ask was, could we do something at Pod 400? Talked about access and ownership there, and or, as another alternative, the adjacent space that we currently lease for soccer fields. Would that be more suitable? They have a number of needs with buildings and potential to move around staff, for their own needs. But again, the time frame was so tight that the reality of getting something done is real challenging. In fact, I think that we're on the agenda for the county board meeting tonight. She had to get her agenda done previously, so she placed us on the agenda. And basically would have had to walk in and, can you work with us? Can you give us this? And can we do it, by your next meeting, and then get it all platted and figured out. So again, that would be a very aggressive approach. Darlene was willing. Obviously, she said their board is very mature. They could understand the situation and see the gravity and the time schedule. But it's an enormous ask, and we'd have to, be prepared if there was anybody that just wasn't comfortable moving that quickly or needed more information. Those are very reasonable approaches. So again, we left the door open. If we couldn't succeed with our, grant approach, that might open a secondary door to come back and have more discussions. So again, a lot of flexibility, but again, from our perspective, we see the grant as the biggest provider of resource. We can't really risk something that might jeopardize that. There's no guarantees. We may not get that grant and be back having another discussion. So I think staff's pretty comfortable where we left it. Everyone's still very interested. I'd say there are more yeses than absolute no's. So that's really good, and we feel good about it. We've continued to work with Farnsworth on our other top site, which has been Weaver Park. We have discussed a number of other parks. We're still looking at site selection, so we don't have a recommendation. In fact, we have started working out our calendar. We have some key design meetings. We're going to do a charrette. We have a public meetings, set. We'll go over those schedules in a little bit. So we'll have a little more time, but really need to get that team focused on the design of the facility to get ready for the grant. Site issues, I'm not saying they're insignificant, but we got to get that building worked out, get some costs, know what we're looking at, and then sort of wrap it up with some sites. And so I said staff's very interested in the Weaver site. Obviously, it's an athletic, high energy based park. It's not saying that there couldn't be other considerations. Farnsworth worked through with us a number of other sites we looked at. I think you all saw that at the study session. Places like Leal Park, which obviously, while its proximity on University Avenue is real attractive, it had other, limitations. Mostly, you'd have to cut down a lot of trees, and there wasn't a lot of expandability. So, we looked at Crystal Lake up by the pool and nature center in that area. Again, it's not unheard of to have a series of complex of buildings, but it would put quite a bit of pressure on that site. So again, we worked through a number of other site considerations at other parks. Some new information that has come up. We want to make sure that any properties that were acquired with land and water conservation funds, you have to get, go through likely a process. So Weaver was one of those sites. Right. So we're trying to get more information, hopefully talk to DNR tomorrow or later this week to find out, what that process, can we still apply for a grant? Is something able to be pending? What's the likelihood of getting that through? So that's why we still need to keep some other sites, open in case we find out you couldn't get that process done and make an application using that site, but that'll really be DNR's guidance on that.
Did you say that it had to end up going through the Park Service, National Park Service?
Right.
Is that right?
Right, so we don't know, find out more about that lengthy,
Yeah.
process. And again, is that independent? Can you be considered for grants pending that decision? Or does everything have to be clean cut
Yep,
up
yep,
front,
yep.
laid out neatly before you get into it?
And that's specific to the permission to build indoor recreation space or any indoor space on land purchased with the Land Water
Oh, I see.
Conservation
So
Fund.
it's
So
any-
it's
any
not
indoor
necessarily a
space.
requirement for the grant,
Right,
but
yep.
the
Just for
grant
them.
would want to see that we either own it or have
Right,
secured
right.
long-term ownership
Sure.
or a lease.
Right.
We just want to make sure that we don't go in with anything less than a wonderful application.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And, if we were competing against groups that owned property versus, some sort of lease site, that would put us at a disadvantage. So our goal and effort is to try to get a clean site approvals, and we'll continue to work on that. We did look at some other park sites and may need to have serious conversations about that. But again, we're working with the preferred sites because they
Sure.
certainly are better or meet more needs. We had good conversations with the city, the county, Urbana School District. Was, trying to find out also if there are other needs or other improvements. And I think one of the outcomes in talking about the East Campus was that there's a willingness for, the parks, schools, city to work together with the county in putting together probably a new plan, a new study to look at that area. How can we improve that overall East Campus? Connectivity, landscape treatments, signage and wayfinding, other plan developments. Maybe there's opportunities to share or trade lands, to advantage the group. So we see a lot of potential with that. And so that was a good outcome. But again, we're still keeping our eye on the schedule, making sure we get our grant application in. We've got to get more attention to the building and the design and the features so that we can outlay them in the grant. Also, we don't know what the grant guidelines are. We're kind of working off
Makes
the
it hard.
2014. We kind of keep reminding ourselves they could change, or they could be different values, amounts awarded, that sort of thing. So we just don't know, have to get more information. According to the DNR's schedule, those guidelines are proposed to be out early in December. So that doesn't give you a lot of time from, I think, December 2nd to January 17th. Throwing a little Christmas and New Year, and that really tightens the field up. Maybe it's by design to see who's most ready and ready to make their applications. I think we have a lot of good ideas that could come to the sites, all of the key sites at Weaver that we're looking at. So it definitely could be a nice advantage, to be at a premier site like that, and it would give us an opportunity to really kickstart development at another signature park if we're successful with that. We do have a couple of documents to share with you, and apologize to make you turn around. We only have two, so we didn't think it was worthwhile rearranging the spaces.
We have wheels besides.
I want to emphasize these are both very much in draft mode.
You flip
Both
the light.
fresh off the presses from our consultant, and we've already identified some things we think need to be updated. There's some gaps in here, but this gives you an idea of the matrix that we're going to be using to evaluate different sites. We included every park site that's over 2 acres, leased or owned, as well as some private sites like Lincoln Square, the Civic Center, and Save-A-Lot. Once we have this fully reviewed and updated, we'll send you all a copy, but we thought, given that it's very much a work in progress, we'd better just give you a sense of what it's going to show. Things in red are some of the things we're still working on more intensely. It also includes a weighting factor, so you can see some scores go up to 3, others go up to 5. The ones that go up to 5 are those that more specifically speak to grant eligibility. And at the bottom, you can see a range of different scores. I expect these will change in some cases, not a whole lot, but in other cases, a fair amount as we get through and update this, because this was just Farnsworth initial stab at this based upon conversations we've had with them in, I believe, 2 meetings to date. So, but it'll be a good tool for us to objectively evaluate our sites and come up with a few lead recommendations for you all. And the next one we wanted to show you was the schedule, and at the very end there on January 17th is our grant submission date. And so between now and then, we need to finalize our site selection and move through design to a point where we can come up with reasonably accurate cost estimates for construction, but also operating through our pro forma. And so beginning next week is when we launch on design. We've got a meeting scheduled with our team. This is draft as well, because just today we changed that meeting date.
Yep.
So design starts next week. We'll continue on with site selection analysis, filling out the matrix through the study session in December. The day after the December study session, we'll move into a public meeting to review some of the site selection criteria that we've evaluated, as well as some of our early concepts for what the facility looks like, and to get public comment on some of our facility concepts. If Weaver continues to stay at the top of the list or towards the top of the list, I think we'll also introduce the current Weaver Park Master Plan and invite people to look at that and comment on that as well. Because if that moves forward, we want to do an updated master plan for Weaver. But still a lot of things to determine, and obviously DNR's evaluation of a site like Weaver that was purchased with LawCon funds will be significant in whether that stays towards the top of the list or not. And of course, when we have the holidays in there, so during that time, they'll be finalizing our design options for our grant application. Staff will get back together with them in early January to review all the updates they've made, and then present to you all at the January board meeting our what we will call our final concept, cost estimate and pro forma, and request permission to move forward with the grant application. A very tight schedule, especially challenged by the holidays, but this will get it done.
That was just so easy that way.
I know, it does, doesn't it?
That was
Right,
good, just,
exactly.
yeah, right.
Right.
Yep.
Well, we have a terrific team. Everybody's very
Yeah.
committed. Our goal is to make a very serious attempt to be competitive and successful in getting this. We'd still need to probably look at some additional dollars, whether we look at, donor opportunities. Certainly that would be the first on the list. There's naming opportunities potentially, so we're very enthused. We wish we had, more time. That's, to be said. But we're going to give it a good go and be as successful as we can. If for any reason we couldn't, or the grant didn't come through, again, we would recommend we continue to work this and look at other next level options. We wouldn't be giving up, but just kind of take another path.
Right.
So, again, community-wide, I think there's a lot of interest. We have some really good sites to consider, so they're all, I think all of the sites that we were seriously looking at had a lot of advantages, probably like everything, some disadvantages. But we think at least for the working order, Weaver Park is probably our recommended site, unless we find out we have complications there, or really couldn't pursue that. So stay tuned.
I guess.
Do you, at this
Questions?
point, even have a thought as to the number 2 site?
It would need to be a park site that doesn't require any sort of grant-related, process to it. We've discussed Prairie Park, we've discussed King Park, we've discussed Loman Park as a possibility that had open space. So basically our criteria at that level, Michael, would be, what parks have a chunk of open space that you could literally physically put something, not even what would the neighbors think of it, or, and we also
Well,
kind
you've
of.
been looking at this matrix. I'm just wondering if.
Correct.
If anything is sort of.
Right. I think sites we probably ruled out were neighborhood parks. That would just be too big of an impact. For example, the city recommended, hey, if you look seriously at Victory Park, you've acquired more property there. It's just not large enough, obviously, to maintain a neighborhood park, as well. And so, again, urban areas, you do things different. You could, hey, we need to do that, you do that, and land is, it has a different significance. Locally, we'd have other parks we would seriously consider, before you'd go at that level. So ruling out neighborhood parks, Leal Park's an example of a neighborhood park. While it's our headquarters, obviously cutting all the trees down to place a building probably wouldn't, warm a lot of hearts in our community. And I'm not
But
saying
with the firewood, maybe.
those other sites all have challenges too. So example, at Prairie, you would have to seriously be committed to relocating ball fields. getting, not the high school field, but our 2 softball fields. There's challenges near the Prairie campus for the, Dr. Williams School with traffic and circulation. And so we're trying to be thoughtful of all those main concerns. We're just hopeful that our Weaver Park site wouldn't be complicated, and it'd be a terrible shame if we had to give up on what's essentially a really good choice to pick a lesser park, in order to meet some grant, requirement. So we'd have to give everything a lot of consideration. But at this point, we're not crossing very many things off the list. A few things, we've moved on. For example, at Crystal Lake, I think at study session, we looked at that area up by the pool. One of the sites would block the view of Crystal Lake Pool. So while you might be able to amass something there, it wouldn't be worth it, if you will, because you would lose something else. And the other area was north, the north section near the nature play area. So while physically you could, cut trees down, mow grass back, fit a building, you have to think about expandability and what if you needed more parking for any of those existing facilities? What would you do there? So it's a bit challenging, to do that. One of the things we have to always be aware of is when you acquire something with a grant or OSLAD, you have perpetual requirements. You have to operate and maintain those sites. So that idea, first I was kind of bristly about the open space component, but if you think about it, it makes sense. If you're given precious money by the state to buy land for open space,
Yeah.
you
And then
have
you
any
build it up.
responsibility if you
Yeah.
start filling it up
Yeah.
with other things. So once I kind of saw it in that lens, I understood it. Maybe it's as simple as, could we provide additional land for the footprint that we took out of open space? That might be something we could, do easier. When I say easier, it may be possible to do that. So we just need to
quickly.
find out what's actually required. And it doesn't probably help that this grant program is, in our careers, only been offered one other time. So it's not like everything's rolling off the top of everybody's tongue. Oh, here's how we do it. Here's the 12th edition of that manual, that we keep updating every year. So, trying to get staff and updated information is our goal right now.
The language we've reviewed from the Land and Water Conservation Fund in terms of consideration for an indoor facility talks about does that indoor facility complement some of the outdoor recreation uses in place? And I think we feel very strongly that what we're proposing would, having health and wellness indoors, health and wellness outdoors, in the fields, in the trails. The state outdoor recreation plan, which is one of the factors they used in evaluating park grants in 2014, talks about is it associated with a regional trail system, or is it associated with serving underrepresented neighborhoods, or is it associated with environmental and conservation education? And we think all of that would be part of our facility. So we feel like once we get a chance to review with DNR, they'll see the merit. The big question is, what is that process moving forward, and how far can that process move between now and the grant deadline? And if it can't be completed, is that a mark of guesses on the grant application? So those are the important questions we need to work through with them in the next 3 weeks.
Right.
Yeah, and
Tight
you gotta
schedule.
figure out your drop dead date for having an answer.
Mhm.
Right.
because-
Right.
Or else run the risk of you give up on the grant.
Right. Right.
Right, yeah. We had
So
some
this has been
conversation-
done before? I mean, their people have changed the land use with
We'll
that
say
grant.
yes,
so-
because there is a process, for that. And so it's rarely exercised,
But you think it's been done?
I think so.
it has.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't tell you which districts.
No,
but
I don't care, but I mean,
I
it's
guess
not
I
like
should
we
say-
would be
They
plowing
define a
through that.
process, so
yeah.
it
Oh,
makes
I'm
it
sure.
We
simple.
probably wouldn't be the ones, creating the wake.
We'd be number 6 on the
Right,
list, yeah.
right. But nonetheless, those kind of process are off-putting, they're concerning, they take time, and
Yeah.
you don't know what the other obligations are going to require. So, for example, if somebody said, yeah, you could build it there, but you have to replace it with another 60-acre tract of land, I'm just making that up. I don't, but, so that would be a challenge. But if it was the footprint of the land, well, that's a different number. That's 2 to 4 acres perhaps. And could you find 2 to 4 acres somewhere that you could, make up that so-called loss? So again, we just need more information because we're not really sure how to interpret what we're reading and what those process will require. But we're still motivated by the probably at least anticipated larger number that goes with that grant, or at least did the last time, to motivate us, to put our best foot forward. So that's where we are. And again, we won't have a lot of time. We wish we had more time, for multiple public meetings, get a lot of input. We'll have to use the time we have and, move our best foot forward on that as well. So stay tuned. We'll provide information as much as we can. And again, as Derek said, it's changing. We learned 2 or 3 things today that started to, okay, this is now, and let's go with this information. So that's our plan. I think our UPDAC meeting for November will be on health and wellness, so we'll bring UPDAC up to speed on it too, and share whatever information we have, at that point. Again, speaking of UPDAC, I think they're very, very excited about this project. We know that, they back at 110%, and so we're working so we can deliver and make sure that, we get something in place. Any other questions about health and wellness? Anything else we wanted to mention, or I think I left anything out? But
I think, kind of back to Michael's comment about you have to be certain pretty soon. In talking with Farnsworth, they are going to begin design next week, and they're going to begin thinking primarily about Weaver Park, but it's going to be in a way that it could be relocated. And there'd be some elements of design that, they may not be able to adjust, in the final hour of the application. But having reviewed what Champaign Park District submitted for the 2014 park grant, it doesn't need to be really high-level design.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was. I'd call it more schematic.
Huh.
I think we're going to have more to offer, and, and we think it'll be a better application for that. But if we got the grant, you could adjust some of your southern exposures and things like that post award. So we're hopeful it doesn't come to that. We think Weaver's going to have a lot of positive things for DNR, but we'll find out here shortly.
I think the county was interested if we could consider, future expansion that might open a door for at least their office staff to, maybe have an opportunity to, build a wing or something like that. We still need to get information to see if that would be permissible also. Can other uses or other, let's call them ancillary, attachments, are they permitted if it isn't directly related to that? So we just need to get more information. But if so, there could be opportunities, for other units if they, had an opportunity in the future. So we do want a site that has expandability, meet all the criteria that was on that list that you saw, which was quite a bit. It's probably not going to be an easy added up, here's your perfect site, and it's all open and you can do whatever you need to. So certainly our preferred sites have scored well so far. We'll finish that process and see where we stand.
But we're not even certain what the future of the county is at this point, do
Right.
we know?
Right. I think that was the idea of, could you hold a space, on a plan where you could expand in the future? And so certainly whether it was our own expandability or another, at one time there were some of the other units were considering that also. So we just want to make sure, can we do that? Is that even permissible? We might have to say no. Love to do it, but, state won't allow or the guidelines won't allow that. So we just need to find out. OSLAD is something we're much more familiar with. It's been consistently similar over the years, although there are a few changes each time. Just not sure about this program. So we'll find out. Moving on, starting at the top, I sent a note to you all, CC First, that's our local kind of coordinating local units of government, trying to make things better locally. We have a meeting set up on Friday, November 22nd at the Illinois Terminal. I think we'll have Rodney Davis, Tammy Duckworth, and Senator Durbin joining us. And the key focus is, can their offices help us get a better performance on our train service? So I think in my note I sent out to you, I sort of joked, when we first started the whole issue of trains, we were really most focused on high-speed rail. We spent about 1.5 years studying high-speed rail. We had some experts from the U of I that have done a lot of work on that come and talk to us. I think what we realized is every state's struggling with that notion. Some are a little closer in getting some things in place, but is going to be a huge leap for us to really consider that. It'd be beyond our local scope. it'd have to be on the radar of somebody else or investors or somebody wanting to go on, coming down one of these corridors. So that kind of reshifted us to, why don't we work on the trains we already have? And the biggest known fact that we all know is the Amtrak service is very unreliable. There's a number of trains, 4 trains a day, 4 or 6, I think they come through, 6, I believe. And I think I was talking with one of the workers there one time. He said, yeah, of our 6 trains, you can be sure that 2 will be on time, and probably 4 will be late. So that's not a very good track record. But the basic situation is, at least the way I understand, anyone listening at home that I'm saying it incorrectly, I can be corrected, but CN owns the track.
Yep.
Amtrak leases, rights on it. It's very different on the East Coast. It's flipped. Amtrak owns those. They control, and they have primary use. CN is citing maintenance issues on those tracks. So one, that doesn't allow the trains to go as fast. And then because of that slower speed, let's call them the cargo trains that CNN runs primarily, commercial, or not passenger, are longer. And so when it comes right down to it moving slower, the Amtraks are forced to pull over at the waysides and let the other bigger trains go through. So a number of approaches, we'll let our legislators sort of guide us through that. But we've talked about a number of, legal strategies that they could probably help with to change that situation. So we're very hopeful we'll at least make some impact. The willingness for those offices to send their people is encouraging to us. So we're all invited. I think it's key staff and boards primarily, although it's an open meeting, but there's an RSVP process, so let Kelsey and I know if you're interested and available. We'll have staff to cover it, so if you're working, don't worry about it or can't get away. But our hope is that we could get a commitment that we could work on this specific need and make rapid changes so we could start to rely on our local train service. So many students, and it's not just this campus, it's Carbondale, because that line goes up and down. So there's a number of communities throughout the state that are struggling. Just so happens this part of the world is notorious for delays and the impact it causes our local communities. And it's also very important for the obvious reasons. We would prefer people taking public transportation if you're traveling or going to the city. I think the university has its own wish list of faster trains, so they could rely on that for meetings and things in the city and getting back here to Urbana. So we'll see how things go on that day.
But the universities even started their own bus line.
There you go. Yeah, that's telling. When I saw that, I thought, okay.
You think more people would be better? A show of interest, so that the more people there the better it would be?
And I think elected officials always matter. As much as I'd love to say, this group, but, when they know there's a number of elected officials,
Sure.
it's, their time and their own energy they're, pouring into it. So
Yeah, okay.
we would hope. And also, I think we're all curious, what will they say? The CC First goes to Washington. Those are things we talk about and have met with different train officials, but we're trying to do a new strategy. Can we get leadership at the top to really help navigate us through that? Who do you talk to? How do you get things done? What sort of commitments can we
Right,
get?
right.
Instead of, because we're just trying avenues. Somebody knows somebody, let's call them and see what they can do. And those tend to end up after 3 or 4 or 5 months, a dead end.
Yep.
So you feel like you may have wasted all that time if you could just, get to the right person or get someone to understand the situation and come up with reasonable approaches to making it better. So seems like a good approach to me. We'll still hope for high-speed rail, but if we get the ones moving, and my understanding that, those trains should be able to run at least at 70 miles an hour, which is, they're at like 50 right now because of the so-called maintenance. Like one of the things we learned was that CN complains that there's soybean oil on the tracks. Well, they're hauling the grain. We're not. The passenger trains aren't hauling the soybean grain. So get a maintenance program out there to clean them up, whether it's daily or weekly or monthly, whatever you have to do. Just, you're the owner. Take care of it. But don't say there's maintenance problems. We have a hand in it, but we're not going to do anything to fix it. So we have to,
They're beans, and then it gets squashed on the rail?
I would
That's the-
assume that, or some sort of, spray of some proportion. I'm assuming it's grain that falls out. Again, I'm not the expert, so
No, but
that's just what we learned at
seems
our
a
last
little lame.
meeting. We all thought it seemed a little challenging that somebody couldn't deal with that. I mean, we all have maintenance issues we have to challenge ourselves with, and it's what you have to do as a responsible landowner. So we'll get more information and find out. Again, I'm sure it's very complicated, and the few statements we say here or there probably don't do full justice, but we need to work on this. All right. Let's see. We also had an update, great meeting on the KRT, the State Planning and Research Grant. We had a large stakeholder meeting out at the RPC with IDNR, IDOT, RPC, the city, the county, Park District, Visit Champaign County, and a few others. We've completed our literature review, looking at existing conditions of land use, sort of our network analysis. That's our bicycle level of service, our level of traffic stress that we looked at, crashes, traffic counts, environmental analysis. One of the things we learned that we need to get more information on is any special waste concerns. There are a few dots on a map that RPC had shown that we don't, while they've been categorized, we don't know to the what extent. Are they things that can easily be cleaned up, or are they deal breakers where you just can't do anything? We're assuming there's a reasonable approach to dealing with that. I know on the other KRT, we had to do a phase 1 and phase 2 study, and capping was the way that we approach that. Basically cap whatever's in place so it doesn't go anywhere or migrate, and the trail was, put in place. So need to get more information, but we're making some progress with that as well. One of our staff goals this year is to begin investigating, working on climate change. Goals for us, looking at resiliency and how can we best situate the district for the future. So we're real excited. Derek and I attended a meeting. We have the pre-law fraternity at the U of I Law School that's through Warren Levy has taken on this study. Like, they're looking at a wide variety of topics. I think we met with 15 or 20 students. Each one of them has taken sort of an avenue that we have provided input and sort of described how that would help us. Derek's provided some more information, quite a bit, so we appreciate that. But the idea is that we could get large chunks of information that we could then put back into use. Things we're interested in: who's doing these sort of plans, where are they in the implementation process, how has it helped their district? So we're hoping we can follow up and get more information about that. And again, we're working with recreation staff, and how do we begin to talk about it in the public? How can we set up programs that might be beneficial or educational? So we're coming at it from multiple sides, just trying to avoid the throw a topic like that into a room and see what happens. We want tangible, reasonable, accountable steps that we can follow through. So tomorrow we're meeting with Scott Tess from the city, learning more about what the city's doing with their work in that area. They've done quite a bit and have been early leaders in this region, probably in the state. So we're eager to learn a little more specifics, where they are, what they're doing, and what they're doing next on that study. A couple other quick things. We had a really good discussion on the UPDAC 50th anniversary. It's coming up, I think, 2021. So Ellen and I had a meeting with invited lots of UPDAC, but we had 4 former chairs attend, had a really, really good discussion. I think one of our interests was creating a giving circle with former UPDAC members. And it was really interesting because I think through that meeting, we kind of came to the realization that maybe it'd be better to focus on the 50th and create the activities and celebrations, and then maybe as an outcome, the giving circle might be a little more apparent. I thought that was a really good observation from Mary Ann Downey. Obviously does a lot of,
good at that.
Right. So we had the right people, had a lot of energy, a lot of good ideas, and I did want to check with at least our 2 commissioners that are involved with our UPDAC group. If you would be interested in working with us or serving as honorary chairs or board members, we would love that. I'll reach out to you. Probably won't be any work for a while because we're kind of gathering information, but it might be good to have a board presence in that group. One of the bigger goals is to create a reunion, an opportunity to invite as many UPDAC people back and share what we're doing and share some of these really rich, fun, neat ideas, and try to find out what they'd be interested in. How could they continue or have a presence with the Park District? Again, the Giving Circle was just one of those ideas. It's definitely not some effort to, try to wring money out of people or anything like that, but we continue to hear that people have long-term interest in working with the district even beyond their time. So we're trying to create a vehicle to allow that to happen, and thought the 50th would be a good target, and then whatever comes out of that, we'll see how much we can get connected, but I'll follow up with you both.
You know, that thing they had, or have had in the paper, which I'm at times a little tired of, but they're looking at people who have come through the university and gone on. That
Right.
might be an interesting way
Oh, neat.
to bring UpDeck
Right.
into what's happened, or have
Sure.
them talk about the things that were the most interesting, the most challenging, their favorite parks, whatever it was,
Right.
to
Good thought.
sort of encourage, because I think that's one of the things that I remember the most was how, parks had just been parks
Right.
until I got an UpDeck, and then suddenly it was, oh, well, I know Chief Schmager Park.
Right.
And, you'd be driving through town, and you'd look at all of the parks in a much different
Right.
way than you ever did
Absolutely.
before. And I think tapping into that might be a useful
Right. I agree.
exercise.
There's a lot we could do with our own websites.
Yep.
Certainly Smile Politely or the News Gazette might have interest too if we had the right,
Yeah.
right story pitch.
Oh, that's a good idea, yeah.
Couple of last quick things. Just wanted to celebrate our staff. We had recently, you're aware of, received 2 awards. One was at the IPD Gala for our arts. That was a terrific opportunity. Staff went up and received the awards. We also celebrated Stevie J's sort of efforts to work with us. So Diane Ducey was with staff that attended that, had a great time. And then recently was nominated for a 40 North Award for the same, for working in the arts with recreation staff. So it's always fun to see everybody recognized and their hard work get some attention. Lastly, we had our quarterly iParks meeting, and we're all being encouraged to report back to our boards on just small things that are new or different. 2 new areas of coverage that iParks has provided. You probably are aware of this, we've shared it, but the active assailant, if you have a terrible situation like that, there's now some insurance opportunities and coverage for that. And the cyber attacks, which again, both of those are not real positive things, but they're realities. And so we have some coverage, if we had some sort of cyber attack, there would be at least some recourse that's provided now through our coverage.
And does that
So-
mean they'll also have some, they'll provide some information and the planning ahead, how to avoid those problems? I'm thinking the cyber
I
stuff
think we
especially.
work pretty well with the city and our providers of IT to try to stay ahead of that. But yes, best practices, more information. It's kind of emerging, at least from their perspective on the coverage, the risk management side. So looking at proactive, I think we're going to see probably that area go up in getting people trained and more information. Our traditional role has been more the coverage, the risk side, but
Right.
we're moving much more into education and, providing best practices for our, member agencies. So just wanted to make sure you're aware that we're thinking of new things. We're trying to listen and get ideas back from our member agencies that make sense or are timely or important to them.
Do we feel that we have some sense of how well we're prepared to deal with, I forgot now what they call it, when they hijack your
A
system?
breach.
Right.
Or, well, not necessarily breach, but if they want to take you over and demand
But
ransomware
That
kind
type
of
of
thing,
ransom.
Yeah, I
have we
mean-
talked about that? Have we, do
Oh,
we?
absolutely, yeah, we
Hi,
did
Katie, you're such a defender, I love it.
we did a year-long training with a company called Know Before, where we actually purposely phished all of our employees through email. And
Oh, I
then
remember
we
that,
did some
yeah.
targeted trainings, where we, trained all of our staff not to click links of suspicious messages. And then, as part of the new agreement that we just entered into with
Mm-hmm.
the city, they're actually gonna take over the administration, and we're gonna renew that agreement with Know Before, but they're gonna administer it instead of our HR department administering it.
Yeah, yeah.
So every user that gets a login to the Park District's network will have to undergo some sort of training for ransomware, cybersecurity, et cetera. So, I mean, I think we're as prepared as we can be. We're probably a lot more prepared than other places,
Good.
is
Backups,
my take.
I think
backups.
Yep.
we've done a couple things.
It's just got a
Speaking
CD
of
under.
backups, we,
Pardon?
a couple of years ago, we got it to where our systems automatically back up with the city.
Mhm.
I would say just being a part of the city versus being our own
Yeah.
agency helps a
Right,
ton
right, right.
because they're constantly dealing with police, fire, and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, so you think they're more on the alert than, I mean?
Yeah,
okay.
versus the old days when we were with like McLeod or
Yes, right,
somebody
right,
like that.
right, yeah, yeah. But I mean, you hear about, I mean, there have been cities that have
Yes.
had ransomware visited onto them, so it's not,
Mhm.
I mean, there was also the lady who took all the money from Dixon, so, you know, it's, you can't ever tell, I don't know that you can tell until something happens,
Right.
but,
Sanford and Shawn are, I would,
They're-
wouldn't
Oh,
say it
Sanford,
never
right, right.
happened, but
Extremely
I can tell
protective.
you Sanford and Shawn are way on top of stuff.
Good.
When it comes to that, and very secure in how we do things.
good, well, I'm not surprised, but it's nice to hear it. Yeah.
And I do hope iParks will not offer to pay ransom.
No, I
Part
think
of
it's
your
That's part
insurance
of it.
coverage.
more after the fact, you know, sort of the,
So once you've
Recovery.
paid, they'll,
right, right, right. Those are all very good questions. If you have other questions or thoughts, feel free to shoot them
Yeah.
to us. We'll track them down. There's probably an answer, but if there's not, that's great, because that gives us a new lead and a new thing to track down.
well, and I think too that if they would provide, or if they would look at this so that they had information where, that could be handed out to a board, so that a board could ask questions and say, are we doing this, are we doing that, are we doing this, are
Yes.
we doing that? That would be extraordinarily useful, because it's, you know, unless you have somebody like Michael who's, you know, dealing with who's
Right.
dealing with, I mean, who, that's his area of specialty.
Right.
The rest of us are, you know, happy to click on Amazon, and that's about our level of capability, so that
Right.
if they were able to give us some guidance and questions to ask, I
Sure.
think that would be
I'll-
terrific.
Share that back. I know one of the things iParks just did was put together what I'm going to call it, sort of a operations style type manual, checklist of best practices. So when I shared it with our staff, no surprise to you all, we have probably a better program
Yeah, I
already
bet,
developed.
yeah.
But for the many, many member agencies that
Oh, yeah.
don't have, they might have just seasonal staff that they hire.
sure.
They don't have any full-time operations. You know, people, that's very helpful for them to try to make improvements at every level they can. So,
Right.
but those are good thoughts, and I'll share them back.
Great.
I mean, in the last couple of years at IPRA conference, they've had
Mhm.
cyber
Right,
Have they?
programs,
Uh-huh.
and they're high-end attorneys who deal with the cyber attacks. Actually, both years I've went to one of them, and they're really good. And, I mean, Sanford and Shawn are right there on top of everything that at least those guys were saying.
Uh-huh.
Some of the stories they had were really, really scary.
Oh, man. I'm good. I feel safer already.
thank you.
That is, I mean, really, I do. That's good to know.
Okay, thank you, Tim, and others. Moving on to the president's report, just a reminder, we have a special meeting a week from tonight at 5:30 to handle some bond details.
There'll be two items on the agenda.
Yeah.
One will be approval of the bond ordinance for the alternate revenue source bonds, and the other will be a BINA hearing for the rollover bonds. And we won't have any other regular ongoing items, so it should be a pretty short
So,
meeting.
so unless a lot of people come to testify at the
Right.
RINA hearing, we
course.
should be.
Spear
able-
will be here.
Oh, we'll
Yeah.
put in extra chairs.
Um, And then in December, we have a December 3rd study session, and then a December 5th joint meeting with CPD for the special rec, again, out at the Hayes Center.
I thought we were alternating this year. No? Wishful thinking? Okay.
We can certainly make that request and make that,
Yeah, make them drive, oh, sorry, Champagne. You know, it would be nice to
Okay.
host it occasionally.
all right.
Um,
Yeah, just, I mean, if nothing else, just to remind people that Urbana is still over here.
Right, exactly,
Right,
Yeah,
and we have special needs residents as well.
exactly.
no kidding.
And then December 12th be the regular board meeting, at which time we're going to do our tax levy, which we normally get done in November, but that will be next month instead. And goals review, and accept our annual meeting calendar, And we need to, once again, abate property taxes for these alternate revenue source bonds, even though we're about to roll them over, we hope. And then review and accept priority projects, report to the Parks Foundation, and closing out the annual bond sale, and approving updates to the safety manual. So we got a pretty full meeting on the 12th.
Mm-hmm.
So I did not have anything further to bring up or cover. Moving on to liaison reports, Finance Study Group met actually before the study session, so I think we've already pretty well reported on that. We are meeting again on December 6th, so
They're good.
the Policy Study Group.
We met in May, and we're working on setting up a meeting for January or February for further policy review.
And in terms of Parks Foundation, Roger is not here to report on that. I don't know if, I think the holiday event has been scheduled at this point.
It has.
On the, and the update planning study group, any updates there?
We met last August, and planning for a meeting in January for further discussion.
Okay. So, any questions or comments on the liaison reports? Hearing none, moving on to old business. There was no old business removed from the consent agenda, and there is no other old business to deal with tonight. And moving on to new business, action to assign our conference delegate credentials for the annual IAPD IPRA meeting. So,
Is any good with me going?
Katie, I don't know if
I
we've
think
heard
you're the
from
only
commissioners.
commissioner.
Yeah,
Oh,
I wasn't aware
Yeah,
of
I
that.
didn't, I meant of the board, right.
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 I'm certainly always happy to be that person, so.
Okay, 3:30. I'm just trying to think, because I wasn't gonna stay on Saturday, so depending when the train,
It's a late meeting, I know, it's
Yeah,
late in the
yeah.
afternoon, so
yeah.
I
but-
certainly will still be there.
Okay, well, you can put my name down as as an alternate, or you can
Alternate?
put, yep,
Okay?
yep, but I will check on the train time and see, because
Or we could
I
have
can-
Nancy as a delegate, as commissioner, and then I could be the alternate if you need
Okay,
to
that
leave.
sounds
That
perfect.
might be
Yep.
more appropriate.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
is that reasonable?
yeah, I think that sounds good. Oh. Do we need a motion for that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you want to, since you're not the, you're not on it, do you want to make that motion?
I move that we certify that Nancy Del Coleman, right,
Mm-hmm.
and/or Tim Bartlett is or are designated to serve as delegates to the annual 2019 business meeting of the IAPD.
Second, I guess I do have to do that.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion or questions? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed? And that carries unanimously. And that takes us to action on ordinance 2019-10, authorizing the sale/disposal of personal property of the district.
Well, we've come, I think, to that point where we need to discuss the, kind of the future of Marin Fold. As you know, that was one of the early sculptures that was in Lincoln Square. There were, our understanding, three at least notable pieces. The whale, which was at the Family Aquatic Center, which was later destroyed after it had cracks and was not able to be repaired. The bear, nobody was really sure what ever happened to that, but there is sort of a bear sculpture out at the Atkins
The
headquarters
pine
out
cone,
there on Windsor Road. That was sort of an inspiration bear from that original piece. I never saw the other piece, so not really sure. The Mare and Foal, obviously, when I came to the district, was already at the old Thornburn Center. It was outside in the playground area. This is what we understand with that piece. It was given to the Park District, or we accepted it. I'm not really sure, what precipitated all that, but we were the receivers. We had held it for all those years. Obviously, being in the outdoor element was probably not the best location for that, as we understood later. It was intended to be indoor. So over the years, weather, freeze thaw, created cracking. We had it looked at a couple of times to see what could be done. There wasn't really a surefire way to restore it. More recently, Derek inquired with Andres from our sculpture conservator that does work around the state and around the country and around the world, does international work. Looked at it. He was, I want to say, able to recommend how it could be fixed, although we couldn't get a clear picture of what it would look like. So kind of in analyzing our situation and the proposed estimated cost of what it would take to restore it, I think what the staff recommended would be a reasonable time to let that piece go. In my work, working with different sculptors, what has been recommended is that it's probably not a good form to, unless something can be restored really well so that it has more public life. And some pieces can be. For example, metals can be welded and, probably repaired easier than stone or glass or wood, things like that. That if it's no longer suitable for public use, if it can't go back to the original artist, if it couldn't be donated to some sort of conservatory for further study or, sort of working on it, for practice with students, that its best course is that it be destroyed or taken out of public view. I think it's particularly important. Obviously, we take great care of all of our public artworks, but there does come a time in a life when a piece can no longer be maintained. I think we should be thinking of all the pieces that we own in the Park District. And I think I also recommend that we try to not own as many of those pieces, that a lease arrangement's probably a better level for us to engage in. We don't have a conservatory full of students that can work on or possibly repair pieces. Everything we do is at cost. I'm not saying we should never own pieces, because some we want and it does add to our collection, and some have been donated. But this is a situation where it's really just not a good investment, and without any outcome that you could guarantee. Questions I would have is, if it didn't turn out well, what would you do with it? Where would you put it? Would you then pay for it and then destroy it? Or we did have some interest early on. The Vet Med was inquiring about some art pieces. I made that one known to them just because of the subject matter. They weren't interested after they found out what condition it was in. Obviously, it would need to be placed indoors. They didn't have a good indoor space. They were building space, but didn't necessarily want to give up space. I don't think they were thinking of that large of a piece. So that was really the only lead that we had as a solution. So that's why staff's recommending at this time that we'd let that piece go. We don't know of anybody that would take it or that we could donate it to for appropriate reasons. I would also caution us that unless we really knew what kind of group we were donating something to, would hate to see it end up in a different location or used in a different way. So it's about respect to the piece. When our piece Keystone was knocked over at Meadowbrook and broke into 3 or 4 pieces, when I followed up with John Isherwood, hey, this happened, and said, we could try to restore it. And he said, no. He said, you can't restore a piece to that level. It needs to be destroyed. If it can't be, I think it's more than reasonably, restored. I think it needs to look in very, very good condition. I wouldn't say flawless, but, is it good for public consumption? Because that's, the artist's name, whether they're living or past, their work still may proceed. Laredo Taft, for example, I don't think you'd want to stick our Lincoln the Lawyer sculpture back out in the park if it had an arm missing or something like that, with our intent to just, it's here and it's ours and we've got to do the right thing. So it may not seem like that's the right thing, but that is at least one course of action we've been recommended to sort of follow. And so, and it may be other pieces may have to consider that. I know we've had to destroy another piece that was at Meadowbrook years ago, the Chagrini piece, the large wood piece that was upside down, the tree that was turned up and abstracted. It basically cracked and checked, and when we wanted in that case, the loan period was up and the artist was living in Europe and just refused to come to America. We couldn't restore it and keep it safe. It was starting to rot out. It had that large dangling piece, that hung above, probably at least 2 stories, high. The thought of it falling on somebody or blowing over in a storm. So we actually had to cut it up and destroyed that piece also. So we have a history of that. The whale was another one. Couldn't restore it in a way. We tried to inquire some local artists. Nobody was comfortable touching it. We didn't know of any place that could, sort of fix that terrazzo. So that was another piece that had to be destroyed, so that it would be in keeping with the artist's original intent to show high quality, first rate piece of art. So that's the recommendation for Marin Foal.
And there was, at least informally, a cost estimate
Yes.
of,
Formal proposal.
$40,000?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we got a full proposal, and it was $40,000.
and yet, even at that price, they couldn't guarantee how it would actually look afterwards.
I mean, I would say any type of that work, short, depending on the material, if something can be, let's say like metal, melted down and repoured or, poured over, you could probably patch things up. But for stonework that's probably cracked the way through and is crumbling and basically disintegrating is a better way. It's not like something had a clean break that you could put an adhesive and, try to get more time out of it. So it's really the intent, what would it look like, the cost, the precedent. We do this at great concern. That's not something we relish. It'd be the last resort, if you will. But we have to have a last resort, and I think we need to be thinking about it in relationship to any of the other pieces that we own. At some point, some board will have to make that decision.
Right.
I would suggest let those future boards decide when they have to. But this sort of precedent approach has been done, at least in 3 other previous, cases of artwork that we've owned.
Right. I'm great for recycling, and I just had never occurred to me that you couldn't just keep finding another use for this sculpture, and if an artist's wishes, or if artists' wishes in general are that a piece be destroyed as opposed to appear in ways that they had originally intended, that really set the mark for me, because I hadn't thought about it from that standpoint at all, and that makes sense to me, because then that's respecting the piece as art, as rather just another chair on the lawn.
Obviously, if the artist was living, you could certainly go back to them and ask, hey, what would you like us to do?
Yep.
Or even if we couldn't afford, to do that, could we give it back to the original owner?
Sure.
So that's another reasonable. So there are other options,
Yeah.
Depending on the situation. But, there's probably many art pieces around that don't have living artists, and somebody is probably making those decisions as they go. So the fact that we give it high consideration, give it the highest, maintenance that we can afford now. Again, I wasn't sure what was done before, if it had been sealed, or would that be, I've heard plus and minus about sealing stone. Also, it can trap moisture in, or moisture still can get in. So it sort of depends who you talk to and what their experience has been. But in this piece case, it's pretty far gone, and I really couldn't see it reasonably on display and looking, fantastic. And that's a great amount of money. If it was $1,000, you might try it and see, well, it's worth that. But at that rate, we could probably commission a brand new Marin Foal, or have something that could last. And while we're on discussion, locating pieces that are supposed to be outdoors, or making those it's not recommended. I think you would want to find out what the artist, intended and where it was to be displayed, and try to follow that. So, for example, if we restored it, would it need to move indoors somewhere? And I don't think we have a good location indoors. I don't know if it's suitable to, patch up and give to somebody else and assume that they would be proud and want to do it. So it is a little bit of, it's an end of life situation.
It's like cutting down a beloved tree in a
Exactly,
neighborhood. It's
exactly.
that same kind of feeling.
Right.
You've loved it for a long time,
Right.
but now it's just reached the
Right,
end of its
and
safe
even with
life.
all the loving care and maintenance, the tree
Yep.
analogy is a good one, where you'd prune it and maintain it and fertilize it and, do things to the root system and mulch it and all those good things, to try to preserve it.
Well, and it's worth noting that this was acquired at a time when we had a whole lot less sophistication about
Correct.
park pieces.
That is correct.
and-
Yeah. So yes, I think we would, what I hear Michael's saying, or at least it speaks to me, is, we know more, we could expect better in the future,
Yeah.
or we knowingly wouldn't take something and stick it outside. We did have a piece at Meadowbrook, not too long after we opened. It was a large wood piece. Harry Gordon was the artist, and we had it, I think, for 2 cycles, so it was there for about 4 years, and we moved it along because it was starting to crack and check. And the thought of, what do you do? And Harry told us, well, this piece should really be indoors. And so I'm not sure what happened to that piece, but that's another example of, if we would have kept that and tried to keep it outside, wood deteriorates pretty rapidly, outdoors, even if it's protected. So I think some of the sculpted, let's call them tree sculptures, you've seen them with eagles and Native Americans and
Well, we had the
whales and
big bear.
things. Yeah,
That's
out at
gone, right?
Ambox.
Yep.
Lasted a number of years, but
Yep.
it too succumbed, and we had to take that one down as well.
All right, since I was the one behind the moving of this, I think I'll make the motion that we approve ordinance 2019-10, authorizing the sale and disposal of personal property.
Second.
That's been moved and seconded. Any further comments or questions? Hearing none, let's do a roll call vote, starting at the right this time.
Aye.
Aye,
Aye.
and that carries unanimously. Takes us on to review of annual board action calendar. And I believe this is here unmodified from the current year.
Anything that's new, we update or add to if it falls under one of our monthly actions. Again, it's intended more as a sort of a roadmap and just helps us keep track and make sure we're on schedule to keep
And-
everything.
And this
So,
does reflect the change in the time when we're appointing UPDAC, new UPDAC members.
It's in August.
Yeah,
Right.
well, yeah, May and August we
Right.
used to try to get started in February and finish by June.
Tim and I talked on the January section that we may wind up actually having a January study session, because the reason we typically don't is because it usually falls right around New Year's, but it's not until the 7th of January this coming 2020.
Oh, yep.
And that with all of the information that's coming from health and wellness and all of our other
Oh, sure.
ongoing projects, that we might want to schedule one. So if you guys want to be open to that, I'm not sure. Tim and I
Yeah.
just briefly talked about it and thought we might run
Well-
that by you guys.
Well, this does not preclude us from having other
Correct.
meetings. So it's a roadmap for a
Yes.
year, and
And
make sure
no
we
action.
don't end
Right.
up, oopsie, we forgot.
yeah, right.
Oh, we were supposed to do that? Yeah. So we just need to say it looks good and,
Yes,
Yeah.
if there's
And I-
anything you wanted to change or move to
Yeah,
another order that we
right.
could
And-
legally do. Some of it, a lot of it's legal documents that follow a pattern.
And presumably, there will be a formal calendar with actual dates on it to approve then next month.
Mhm.
Yeah. Moving on to any new business removed from the consent agenda, there was none. So we're at comments from commissioners.
I appreciate the information that's coming in from, I don't know if we call it marketing, whatever we want to call it, about all the coverage that the Park District is getting, and I was particularly cheered with the ukulele thing.
Right.
It was quite lovely, and it was obvious that people were really having a good time. It was something that's free, that was for all ages. I thought Jacob sounded really terrific. So I'm glad that that's coming to us, and I'm super glad that the community's getting to find out about the interesting stuff that we're doing, and I appreciate the efforts, and I'm glad that you're sharing them with us.
Great. We'll continue to do that. Incidentally, just a quick comment on that.
Yeah.
Did anybody see there was a great, I think it was a PBS show. It could have been on, I think, the News Hour. Maybe it was a segment on that. But it was called Music for Seniors. I've asked Corky and staff to take a deeper look into that. But
Yeah.
it was like what we're doing with ukulele lessons, but there was a whole lot of other music programs. And they're really finding them very, very therapeutic, working with older adults with age-friendly sort of approaches. It was all kinds of concerts, just everything musical that you could possibly think of is being done now with older adults, and I think it's a really good opportunity for this park district to look at that, because I think we're a music community. We have a lot
Exactly
of
right.
performers.
Yep.
There's a lot of music lovers, and what at least appeared to be a low cost, just entertaining some people, seemed like a lot of fun. And the therapeutic benefits that they talked about were just enormous. I think, most of us are probably music lovers in the room, and we know what that feels like. But picture if you're isolated, you're out of contact, you don't get that. I think something inside of you would seem to wither or die, if you're a real music fan. So integrating that, it's international language. You don't have to be able to say the same words.
Right,
It just
yep,
sort of
yep.
moves people. So maybe there's more we can do in that vein.
Right, and I've just been hearing a lot of studies that show that people who are in relatively advanced Alzheimer's
Right.
conditions,
They talked about that.
they don't, with no response to any family members, but
Exactly.
they'll respond to music.
Right.
I mean, it's talk about a core
It is. Right.
thing.
It also had that, and it also brought calming. There were all kinds of physiological benefits
Absolutely.
that went right along with it. So we'll see what more can be done.
The viewing Tim's talking about happened on October 4th, so Janet, actually, I just talked to her today, that's why
Oh.
the date's in there.
That's wow.
But she is going through WILL
Oh,
and
great.
trying to find the
Oh, good,
internet version of that.
Mhm.
If we find it, we can send that along to you too.
great. Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, I can't imagine anything negative from that, from increasing our use of that.
Right. And we love the arts, and so it fits as well into
Yeah,
that.
We're looking to try and find ways for youth and younger individuals as well with music and underrepresented, so I've been working with a guy that does guitar lessons and trying to find, he's particularly interested in individuals who can't afford regular lessons.
mm-hmm.
So that's another avenue we're taking as well.
Great.
See if we can find a way to make that happen.
You guys are always looking, that's great.
Any other commissioner comments? Hearing none, we've exhausted our agenda, and I'll declare us adjourned.
Great. Thanks all.
Thank you all.